The date is June 27th at 10:30 a.m. And we are in the library in Akron, Ohio, here for the Underground Railroad National Park Service project with Ms.Marsha Mills. Would you mind stating your full name for the record and spelling it for us?
Sure, my full name is Marsha Sue Mills.
Would you mind spelling it for us?
Sure. Marsha is spelled M-A-R-S-H-A, and Mills is M-I-L-L-S.
Okay, excellent. And then let's see, what is your place of birth and birthday as well?
My place of birth is Hillsboro, Ohio. Mm-hmm. In Hillsboro, Ohio Hospital. And I know I was named by my dad, and I'm the youngest of 4 children.
What is your birthday as well, just so we know?
October 23rd, 1949.
Excellent. Oh, yes. I apologize. I always forget to do that. I am Gabrielle Hurd with the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program, and I am here with...
Ronan Hart. Helio Alves.
Excellent. Oh, and...
BarryJurgensen, National Park Service.
Excellent. Thank you. Let's see. So going back to your place of birth, is that significant at all with your connection to the Gist settlement? Did your parents, is that near the Gist settlement at all? Were your parents?
Well, it's near the Gist settlement, but it's not significant because I was born in a public hospital. Mm-hmm. And other than the public hospital was in Highland County.
Okay. Let's see. Where did you grow up in Ohio?
I grew up in Georgetown, Ohio, which is actually in Brown County.
And that's where it's my understanding that there's multiple locations for the Gist settlement.
There are 3 locations for the Gist settlement. But I did not grow up on any of them.
Okay.
I know where they all are, but I did not grow up on them.
Where were your mother and father born, and where did they grow up? I don't know where my dad. I got to assume my dad was probably born in Georgetown, Ohio, because he's always told us he lived there all his life. I'm going to make an assumption because I should have brought my mother's birth certificate because I sure do have it. My mother probably was born on or near the Gist settlement because her birth date is March 16th of 2016. And that's just an assumption. I should have brought her death certificate because I have a copy of that.
Would you mind explaining for people who don't know what the Gist settlement is?
Yes, I can do that.
It's a big question. We can break it down if you want into smaller questions.
The Gist settlement, from a layperson's standpoint, because I'm not a historian, was a large number of acreage given to the freed Gist slaves from Samuel Gist's plantation, Gould Hill, in Hanover, Virginia. It was given to them from his will because when he died in 1816, that's when the term Gist settlement. It took him a while, I'm certain, to probably wade through his will and get situated with where they were even going to relocate these slaves to. Because he really didn't say, he just said, give them land so they can build homes and schools and churches. But of course, in Hanover, Virginia, at that time, you couldn't very well set that many slaves free in Hanover, Virginia, when you still hadn't even had the Civil War. They had just barely gotten past the Revolutionary. And so it's the movement, the manumission of the slaves, that large number, and coupled with the movement of them, took about 2 to 3 years to get them to Ohio, in 3 locations in southern Ohio.
Do you have any family stories about that passage from Virginia to Ohio? Do you know anything about what that 2 to 3 year walk was like to get there, if it was a walk, or how they made it there?
Some of them probably did walk, but they probably came in they probably had horse-drawn buggies, horse-drawn carts. But no, I don't know of anyone that's ever told me or referenced any information about what it was like to make what I call the transition from Virginia to Ohio. Mm-hmm. We just know it happened. But I may be too young, because people that would have known something about that would have been several generations ago, if there was even an oral history told then.
Mm-hmm. What stories did you hear about the Gist settlement growing up from your grandparents or your parents?
When I was growing up, I only heard one recurring theme, and it was from my mother, who is a fifth-generation descendant. She was always concerned for whatever it is that she heard. She talked to us as children about. She would do it on a recurring basis at the dinner table when we were all gathered there. You girls, looking at Peggy and Marsha, you girls better figure out this Gist thing. It could be important for you, important for everyone. And I said, Mom, why is it important? Is it land? Is it money? And what is this Gist thing? Sometimes she would even mispronounce it and say Gisty. She said, I don't know. I'm only telling you. It's important that you figure it out. And that was like a recurring theme. Like we'd hear it on a regular basis. And it really, it's something you hear. You put it in your brain, and you say, okay, I'll work on that, Mom. When I'm not in the 11th grade or the 12th grade or getting ready to go to college, I'll work on that problem. It never really became an issue, from my standpoint, until my mother became very ill, and the doctors told us that she had a hereditary disease. And it clicked for me, because I happened to be I don't know why, but I was with my mother when my grandmother, who married into the Gist, when my grandmother became ill with the disease and passed away with it, when I was a sophomore in high school. But then they weren't even calling the disease what we know it to be now. When my mother got it, I said to my mom, Mom, when she finally got home, I said, Mom, is this the illness that Grandma told her passed away from? I said, where's her death certificate? That's now my Nancy Drew detective mind clicks, and I said, where's her death certificate? Is this the same illness? Because this doctor keeps saying that this is a hereditary disease. So I want to know what's going on. And that is when the pieces came together. And that was, goodness, she had just been diagnosed with the illness and suffered with the illness for 13 years before she ultimately passed away from it with it also. But longevity is in their genes, because my grandmother was in her 80s when she had it and died of it, but they didn't really have a treatment for it then. My mother had it and was treated for 13 years before she passed away, but she was heading towards 92 when she passed away with it. My uncle, her brother, was in his 90s when he passed away with it. That's not the connection to the Gist settlement, but that is how it really became an issue. We started researching it. So then we said, okay, now maybe we better figure out this Gist thing. My sister Peggy is a school teacher. She's a music teacher. Sorry, Peggy. She's a music educator. And she's always got summers off. So she had a chance I said, Peggy, you need to go research this. Maybe you got to find out what's going on. And that's kind of how we backed into this. It also was coupled with the Cincinnati Enquirer did a story on the Gist settlement and interviewed my grandfather. That's his picture. At the time that they did this interview, I wasn't even in Ohio. I was, he did that interview, I had to have been at Ohio State. I was at Ohio State because I remember Peggy sending me a copy of the article. But I wasn't sitting in Cincinnati. I wasn't sitting in Georgetown, Ohio, or near Sardinia, where usually, if I'm home, we go visit our grandparents, or our grandparents come to visit us. I mean, it wasn't like we didn't know who these people were. It wasn't like we didn't know what the farm was. But we didn't think of that farm and all those neighbors up there that were surrounding him. We knew that they were related to us in some way, either some by true relation or some just by close association with our grandparents. But it wasn't like at that point in time we associated the word Gist with it because we hadn't made the connection. But he at least got interviewed. And I'm still kicking myself because I had a copy of that newspaper, and in one of my moves in Michigan, I lost that article, and I'm kicking myself. I said I should have got that thing framed because it was a good article where he talked about it. But that's the only time he really talked about it.
Well, we got to go through the Cincinnati newspaper archives and find that newspaper.
You can because I think I tried to locate it myself once upon a time.
It's a lot to go through, definitely.
Well, no, it's what do they call it? It's on microfiche. I know it's on microfiche because the one library they had this picture, but they cut the date off of the article. But it's on microfiche.
Going back a little bit, why do you think your mother asked you to look at it? Why do you think she couldn't do it herself? What was holding her back from that? Why couldn't she look at it,
Mother
think
would
about
have
it?
never been able. Okay, I don't want to say never. She has 4 kids, and herself and her husband. She was always very, very busy. Very, 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 very busy. And she was looking at us at the time as, okay, these people they're older now. They can do some things. She probably made the obvious assumption. They're going to have the access to go to the library and sit at the library. And they could figure out what this thing is.
Did you ever hear a similar sentiment from either your grandparents asking you to discover more about what the Gist settlement really was?
No. Granddad Toller would reference, on occasion, I can still remember him saying it a couple times. He would reference things. He would say, he would see someone doing something or wasting something, and he would say, Strawberry would really be upset that you did that. And he would say, who's Strawberry? She's one of the older slaves. That's the most that we would get. Or Sally would be really unhappy if she saw you doing this. Those are the 2 that I remember the most. But it isn't like he talked about it to us. Now, he obviously had to have said something to my mother and to her brothers, because it's not like she wouldn't have kept it as a recurring theme, and my uncles knew about it, but only from the standpoint of hearing him talk about it.
You know, another thing that interests me is when you quote your mom, she always says, she calls it this Gist thing, which to me implies that it's more than a place, it's more than a people, it's a lot of things. So what do you think are all the parts of the Gist settlement? What do you think it encompasses?
I'm going to tell you the truth, because that's all I can really do. I think the biggest parts of it are about the land and the fact that the land did not get to be retained by the descendants of the slaves. Now, when you think there's a lot of parts to that, because you're going through multiple generations of people, multiple generations of families. But when I think of the issues surrounding, and there really are big issues, the the questions surrounding the Gist settlement, it's about the land and the fact that when you have all of these people who were given parts of it, and how many of their actual descendants now own or retain some piece of it, it gets rather small. And if there is oral history about how it got passed on, that's something that should be told, but there may or may not be.
You know, for the audio record, when you're talking about the land, are you talking about land in Virginia or land to where the Gist settlement travelers came to in Ohio?
I'm really talking about the land. When I think of the Gist settlement, it's the land that's in Ohio that the slaves were actually transported to.
Okay.
And their descendants.
So how old were you when you first went to the Gist settlement, once you started learning about it, and what was that like?
I can tell you exactly when it went. Peggy had done enough research by then that we knew that Gould Hill was the plantation. I traveled a lot for the car company. I worked for Volkswagen for 25 years. I traveled a lot for them, even though I was in human resources, traveled a lot for them. I was on a business trip in Virginia, and I had to stay over the weekend. I went to the Hanover, Virginia Historical Society. The man's name was Stu Richards. I asked Stu Richards, I said, Stu, do you know anything about Gould Hill? I didn't even mention the word Samuel Gist. I said, do you know anything about Gould Hill? The Gould Hill plantation, because that's what we knew thus far in the research. I said, the question I asked him was, I believe I'm a descendant of this plantation. I want to go in and see it. I said, I know where it's at. I've driven past it twice, but I want to go in and see it. And I said, do you know who owns it? He said, I don't know who owns it. He showed me a picture in the book of the large, the 3-story storage barn that still sits on the plantation. I left him my business card, and I said to him, and my email address. He said, if you find out, please let me know, because I want to go and see that, because I believe I am one of the descendants of the slaves. Stu Richards emailed me a month or two later. This is who I have been told owns Gould Hill. James and Sally, I forget their names. I have it written down in my notes, but he sent me the names of them. I called for the phone numbers, because back then, it was in 2001, you could call the phone numbers up. So I called them. And we spoke the first time. The gentleman, James and I spoke for about an hour, and I told him, this is why I'm calling you. He was in the middle of watching the NBA playoffs. I remember it very well. It was in March. He was watching it, and I was watching it. And we talked about it in the background. He said, why are you calling me? I told him who I was. I said, and this is what I want to do. I said, all I want to do is I want to come and see what's in the big 3-story barn, what's in the big house, and what's in the small houses around it. He said, I just want to see the property. He said, I don't want the land. He said, and how do you know that you're a descendant? I told him, because my sister's done enough research that we know that Toller was the name of the slave master for Samuel Gist, and our grandfather's name is Toller. And that's how it began. He said, okay. I said, I said, this is how I got your name. He said, I went to the Hanover Historical Society, and I saw Stu Richards. And he knew who Stu Richards was, because that took place during our initial conversation. I could tell he was still concerned. So I said, I don't know as much history as my sister Peggy does. I said, if you'll feel more comfortable, I can call you back next Sunday or whatever date you want, and she can read you some of the history about our relationship to the name of Toller that may make you feel better. So he said, that would be good. He said, but he told me initially, he said, I don't have a problem with you coming, because I let him know up front, it wasn't about, I'm not getting ready to sue you or anything. I said, I want to see what's in the 3-story barn. I want to see what's in the big house. And I want to see what's in the small rooms around, the small buildings that are connected to that farm.
And then about a week transpired, and then we called. I had a three-way call. I called him. I had Peggy on one line. He was on, and then we set the date up for July, and that's how it began. And I'm still kicking myself because I made a video and took pictures when we were out there for a week. When I go back down to Ohio in July, I'm going to go back to the Gist settlement in Hanover in Highland County because I loaned my video to them and they haven't returned it. And so I said, I'll even recognize it because I know what kind of box it was in. But I still have the pictures from when we were there. But that's how it began.
Yeah, you got to get that video back. Yeah, come get it.
Well, I didn't think he would keep it, but I could tell. It was like for him, it was very, very important because he didn't have anything.
Really quick, Toller, is that Toler?
Yes,
Okay.
Toler.
Okay.
And to clarify, you were talking to the descendant of Toller, the slaveholder, or
Stu Richards was the Hanover.
Stu Richards he was an employee in the Hanover Geological Society. Because all I did, I walked in there. I'm just Jane Q. Public. And I said, do you know about this place? He said, yes, we've heard of it. I said, and I said, I believe I'm a descendant of it. I want to know who owns it because I want to go see it. He didn't know at that time, and that's how it began.
okay, so he was with the museum or the.
He was with the Historical Society when it started.
Going back a little bit, I want to talk about religion as it relates to people with the Gist settlement. Do you remember religion being church being an important part of your grandparents' life and the people living around him in southern Ohio?
That's a very good question because I said, let me think of the kind of things that if I was asking these questions, religion played an important part for these Gist slaves. I think it is very interesting that when you see the settlement that is in Highland County, and you see the what remains of the settlement that is in Sardinia, Ohio, there are similarities around religion. They both have churches that were built by the Gist descendants. And it isn't like they're small churches. They're not huge churches, but for the time, I thought it was most interesting that they have churches right there on site within the settlement. So especially like, no matter which one you see, whether you see the Gist settlement that's up in Highland County, or you see the one that's in Brown County in Sardinia, the church is in a location where the people that have property, the Gist property around or close, you could walk or drive there very easily. So it was obvious that church was a central part of their community. Because that's really what you have to kind of think of it as. It's like a community. And church, for me, the other thing that's unique about us is all 6 of the people in my mom and dad and my immediate family were born on Sunday.
Oh.
When we used to talk about that all the time, because we thought that was interesting. We were all born on Sunday.
You're born close to God, yeah.
Yeah, and when you go down to Southern Ohio, you'll see the church that we went to all the time. Aside from the Brush Creek Baptist Church.
Out of curiosity, do you remember what denomination these churches were?
Yes, the one in Georgetown, Ohio, is African Methodist AME, African Methodist Episcopal.
Do you know if the others are also AME?
No, the one that you're going to see in Sardinia, Brush Creek Baptist Church. I went to that church as my mother that was my mother's home. We called that my mom's home church. When she didn't want to go to Delaney, she would take us to Brush Creek. We went to Brush Creek's homecomings, just like we went to Delaney Chapel's homecomings. She took food to homecoming, both at Delaney Chapel and at Brush Creek, because she still viewed that to be her home church. It's a Baptist church.
That's.
But it's a unique characteristic. Delaney Chapel is in Georgetown, Ohio. It's not part of the Gist settlement, but the one at the church in Highland County, the Gist settlement in Highland County. When Peggy takes you up there to see it, you should make sure that she lets you meet. Those descendants still live there. They don't still use that church all the time, but when there were a heavier population of them living there, they went to that church, and they had a preacher at that church, and they have a graveyard at that church.
Do you think, out of curiosity, that makes me think, do you think they settled around those churches, people who are descendants of the Gist settlement who decided to live around a Baptist church and then an AME church? Do you think that's why multiple settlements were created? People who wanted to be close to other Baptist people or other AME people?
I'm not certain that the church, I think at the time that the settlements were created, I think the church was something that they thought I would think, it's my premise, when I think of the personalities of the descendants, I think they probably were most concerned about getting themselves a home to live in and shelter. And because they were used to going to church or congregating when they were on the plantation on Sundays, that's a common characteristic that you can read about in every history book you ever see. I think that the development of the churches may have come second after their homes. Mm-hmm. I don't think they went there thinking, I've got to go find other people. I got to go find other, but they're like me. I think because they were all there and the land was there, that was the obvious place. If their house was there, if their homes were there, if their farms were there, then why not build a church there? Because we want to go to church on Sunday.
Mm-hmm. So after maybe you visited the Gist settlement for the first time, did you start trying to find other people who are descendants of people from Gist who are maybe spread around Ohio or the country? What was that like?
After Peggy and I saw the Gist settlement, she was already holding what she calls gatherings for the Gist slave descendants. She was holding gatherings even before we went to Hanover. They just became more, I think they became larger or a little bit more robust after she had been, and we came back and reported on what it was like seeing Gould Hill. What it's like when because you don't have a really good feel for understanding what plantations are. Seeing a farm is one thing, but the size of that plantation is very large. They still have remnants of the slave houses there. They have the main building that the slaves helped build. They have the 3-story storage barn that Samuel Gist used as basically a produce store to sell produce out of. We were very fortunate. We have bricks from the grist mill that's there on site off of the Pamunkey River. And I think it was only after we started having gatherings that more people that were descendants started to come forward and wave their hand and say, yes, I think I am. Or yes, I know I am because this is what I know, blah, 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 blah. But before that, it wasn't like there were a bunch of people that were coming to me anyway, not to me, asking about it.
How do you, in relation to the Gist settlement, how do you think slavery and enslavement was talked about between their families and in your family? Was it something that people remembered and wanted passed down the memory of that, or was it something hard to talk about?
That's a good question.
We can break it into smaller questions if you want to.
No, I mean, it isn't like, in our family, it wasn't like slavery was an ongoing, talked about issue. If we had questions about slavery, Mom and Dad never had a problem answering the questions. My dad especially, he didn't have any problem telling us. He said, yes, we do get treated differently. Yes, this is what it's like. This is what it was like for me as a kid. And I wasn't in slavery, but his parents were very, very poor. My mother talked about what it was like up there on the farm and how she left Sardinia and came to Georgetown, and that was a big thing. But there's some guiding principles around all this. It's like, okay, it's out there, it's still there. There is unequal treatment, unfortunately. But you remember, you treat people like you expect to be treated. No matter what's going on, you treat people, that's my dad's big phrase, you treat people like you expect to be treated. So that's, as I said, Granddad Toller didn't spend a lot of time talking about that. There's some characteristics that describe the way these people work. I mean, because I thought they might ask me what are some of the characteristics of growing up. Hardworking, always hardworking, honest man, working every day of the week. Every day of the week. Always working. My parents, always work. You have a job. What is it? The one phrase Granddad used to say, his friends, I call them the old black people, they had a phrase. If you can look up, you can get up and go to work. Simple.
That's hard. It's hard living, working every day. I have to say. How do you think that affected him? Or do you think he didn't think of it that way?
Oh, no. It was like there was many times he would be at our house. He'd come over for Sunday dinner. He'd come by, he'd be over for Sunday dinner, and he'd say, okay, I got to go now because I got to go do some work for so-and-so. And it would be on Sunday evening. Or I got to go now because I got to get ready to go do some work, or I'm going to go drill a well for somebody tomorrow. So it was like you got real clear on a work ethic. These are people anyway that didn't have a lot of money. They had a huge amount of intelligence, huge amount of skill base. But given the time that we're in America, their ability to channel it into the avenues that we can do it now were very, very different. But you have people that, they're going to work every day. My dad would say, you can always get a second part-time job turning $100 a week, Marsha. There's a lot of jobs out there. You can never think you don't have money. You can always get a second job, turn $100 a week, earn $100 a week. But he was also living off of that phrase. You treat people like you expect to be treated. And that when you get that drilled into you, that's and why do I have perfect attendance for the first 6 grades of school? Because you go to school unless you're sick. And if you're not sick, you get up and you go to school. I still have my silver dollars because in those days, you had perfect attendance. They gave you silver dollars. They just did. I still have them.
Better than what I got, man.
Hey, who has perfect attendance? You talk about perfect attendance now, people say, you mean I have to get up and go to school? But it's just a work ethic, a way of life that was built in because they're out there working every day, doing stuff, moving forward.
So maybe these gatherings or when you talk to other people who are descendants from the Gist settlement, do you see a lot of similarities in how they were raised with how you were raised in terms of the attitudes that your parents had, or even things like what your parents cooked, what they ate, sayings, any kind of shared culture maybe that came from Gist, if that question makes sense?
That question makes sense.
Well, I'm asking
and
if it does.
I'm trying. I'm not as big on the sayings of these other people, but when we're around them, there's a lot of similar. Like there's certain things that that they may refer to that my sister or I may understand. because of where we're at in the descendant chain. Other people might not. I think one of the reasons why the gatherings were important early on was because there was a lot of sharing of information, and people talked about, they viewed it more as gatherings, and everybody brings food, and everybody and you can see stuff in terms of similarities there. And I did on occasion when I would go to the gatherings. Peggy will be a very good person to ask that question too. But there's a lot of, what do you call it? Because my mother told me many years ago, she used to be the main cook for her family on the farm. And she liked cooking. And so I wasn't ever surprised when Granddad would sometimes say to her, will you make my wilted lettuce salad? And it was basically, it was coleslaw, but it was not coleslaw made with mayonnaise. It's coleslaw with a vinegar base. But he asked for that all the time. He would say to her, will you make I call it wilted lettuce salad. But it's basically, no, it's in the dimensions of coleslaw. It looks like coleslaw, has the ingredients of coleslaw, cabbage and carrots and lettuce, but it's not based on mayonnaise, it's based on vinegar. It's good, but it's based on vinegar. And transparent pies.
Transparent pies?
Definitely. What is a transparent pie?
It's a pie that is, they still make it. The last one that I had, and Peggy and I were together, when we were at the Golden Lamb, we went there for Thanksgiving dinner, and one of the desserts they had was transparent pie. It's a clear pie made with a custard base. Some people serve it plain like that with nothing on top. When my mother would make it, and she didn't make it often, but on occasion she'd make it, generally for him or for my dad, we would have, sometimes it would have blueberries or blackberries or rhubarb on top. But it's a transparent pie. It tastes good, but it's transparent. It's white in color. It's not beige in color, it's white. But there's usually stuff on top of it. But that's what, when Peggy and I saw it at the Golden Lamb, we both said the same thing. Oh, wow. They made a transparent pie, but there's nothing on top. Because that was our recognition of what they were having.
I can't tell you what I'd give to try transparent pie. That sounds fun.
I was more surprised that they were even serving it there.
So in the years, talking about that, in the years since, you said the descendants don't own as much land of the Gist settlement as they used to. Have you noticed traditions changing in the area? Do you meet more people when you're there who you don't necessarily relate to in the way you relate to other Gist settlement descendants? Do you notice a change in the culture?
It's not so much a change in the culture as much as it's a change in, like everything else. The U.S. keeps changing, and so progress moves forward. We don't rely as much on a rural existence as we did, and that, I think that's got some of the lack of the ability to maintain the land and be able to live off of it and sustain yourself off of it, I think is one of the reasons, like it is everywhere, that property changes hands. The uniqueness, for those people that have some deep understanding or a deeper understanding than just this is 3 acres of land in the Gist settlement, their desire to keep it may be greater than someone that's looking at it and saying, well, it's 3 acres of land, but if I sell it to this place or that place, they're going to give me more money for it. I won't have to pay taxes on it anymore, and I may want to be able to go ahead and sell that property versus keep it. But I think it's only because of the shift in the country. We don't rely on farms anymore as much as we used to.
And I'm interested, do you think that's a good thing, or Do you regret that change? I hear from a lot of people who feel differently about that.
I think it's bad in some ways because the food's not the same.
No more transparent pie.
It's not so much transparency pie. It's like it's things like growing up. My parents, growing up in Georgetown, Ohio, we lived on 7/8 of an acre, and that's a fair amount of property. So we always had my mother and my dad. They were humble people. They never had enough money, like most people. So they grew a lot of vegetables. They grew a lot of stuff on their 7/8 of an acre. And so I can tell you, tomatoes don't taste the same. Sweet potatoes don't taste the same. Strawberries don't taste the same. Corn is about the same. The chickens that my grandmother raised, chicken isn't chicken anymore because the chicken really doesn't go out and interact with the earth like it used to. My dad and I used to talk all the time. Catfish are not catfish anymore because they don't grow catfish on the creek anymore. And my dad was a big fisherman, and it was not at all uncommon. Catfish right out of the creek. But it's not the same anymore. It doesn't even taste like catfish.
And you were saying how your parents and grandparents were so long-lived, coming from that background of, eating just what they grew and everything. I can't help feel like there's a connection there.
There may or may not be, but there probably is. Because yes, longevity is in their genes. I mean, Granddad Toller I was starting my senior year at Ohio State. He died when he was 96 years old. And he had lived and worked on his farm up until the last 3 years of his life. He dressed just like this picture. He lived and worked on his farm all the way up until the last 3 years of his life. And he spent those in a nursing home, but he died at 96. My Uncle Bill died after he celebrated his 90th birthday. And my mother had already celebrated her 91st birthday and was heading towards 92 when she passed away.
I think, working that late in life, those
are long lives.
That's not just an incredible work ethic. That just shows he must have been exceptionally healthy to be able to have been able to work in his 90s.
He lived on the farm by himself.
Yeah. Changing gears a little bit, we're here for the Underground Railroad project. How do you think, do you consider the Gist settlement a part of the Underground Railroad?
Yes and no. I think that the direct connection, which was one of the issues, I think, the direct connection to the Underground Railroad is only alluded to in this book by Paul Young, and that's what I call it, alluded to, because I marked the one page when I read it again last night. I said, there's only really one place. So it isn't like I can stand here and say there's a bunch of conductors and there's a bunch of pathways that people use. But I'm looking at the time that the Gist settlement existed, the time that the Underground Railroad was at its most busiest. The potential that there's not going to be people that can trace back incidences that happened or trace back incidences where people went to the Gist settlement and used it as a stopover before they kept going. I think I'm not going to be at all surprised if someday that's written about with a fact-based reference versus what someone thinks may have happened. Because it's the fact-based reference that you're really talking to that's not really anywhere in history. But when you look at where it sits, where it's located, where the Ohio River is in location to it, going north to Canada, going north, period, it would be hard not to be able at some point to keep doing enough research. The right research just hasn't been done yet to make enough direct links. Now, Peggy may know of more, but I don't know of anyone that's made a direct link. I think a lot of people say they probably did because, I mean, if you're a slave and you're running, and you run into a place where there's all these people that look just like you, and they even know what you're running from because it hadn't been that long since they were there, of course they're good. But has it been factually based, documented? No.
Okay, so when and how did you hear about the Underground Railroad?
This is how I heard about it. Well, aside from knowing in high school, but in the Cincinnati location started working with Peggy on the gatherings. The division, started working with her. Carl Westmoreland, to be exact. When Peggy and Carl Westmoreland were leading the charge to get the memorial plaques at the cemeteries, at the guest settlement, that's when the Underground Railroad became very much more into the forefront. Because the first cemetery was the Sardinia one, and then there was Hillsborough, Highland County was next, and then it was what was it? Scott Township, the one down in Wellsburg. I call it Wellsburg because that's the city that's closest to. But when they got their markings, the cemetery markings, and the dedication ceremonies, that's when it became more prevalent. But Carl Westmoreland was always around, came to some of the gatherings, made his presence known, talked about the evolution of how this Underground Railroad Museum was coming into being. And so that was the connection for us.
Do you consider, it's your relatives came to Ohio prior to emancipation. Do you, even though they were freedmen, they must have faced a lot of challenges along the way. And do you think they ever had to rely on the Underground Railroad while traveling north? Or at least the protection of people from the Underground Railroad? It doesn't need to be, I think you said like fact-based, like just something that you've heard from relatives, something that you got a feeling from your family.
I haven't.
You haven't?
I haven't.
That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah. I think you mentioned earlier, maybe before we started, what you feel about the importance of the Gist history and the need to preserve it and tell people about it and put it in museums. So I want to hear more about that. Why do you think more people should know about Gist? What should they know about Gist?
More people need to know about Gist because it's the only time in history that many slaves have been set free. And it's as much a significant part of the American history as is the Civil War, the Vietnam War, the Revolutionary War, because you set people free. It's the basis for the civil rights legislation that they're working with now. It's the basis for the Equal Rights Amendment that they're working with now. And that's why I think it's important. That's why, I have to tell you the truth because it needs to be known. But for a few people that talk about it through oral history, Americans don't know anything about that. They've heard the word manumission. because we've heard about that. We all went to elementary school and heard about it in the history books. But to actually say that you know something about it, or there's something near or close to the state where you live in that was part of that, that's a significant piece. That's like saying I live next to Appomattox Courthouse. You know, that's important because we all know about Appomattox Courthouse. Why? Because it was a significant part of history. And the freeing of all those slaves at that point in time in history is no less important.
You know, one thing that it makes me think of, once your relatives, it was, as you said, it was a lot of people, it was the most people ever freed at once in American history. So coming to Ohio, do you think they experienced any, do you have any family memories of resistance from whites in the area in Ohio or northern Kentucky? Or do you have any stories of people welcoming them and helping them to settle into their new homes?
I don't know. I've never heard of any stories as it relates to the Gist freed slaves. I really haven't. That may not mean that there aren't some out there. I just haven't heard them. Mm-hmm. But I would assume that it's coming to Ohio would be like anything else. They're going to have to clear the land themselves because the land was uncleared. And whether or not people are going to help them or hurt them or just be neutral, I don't know.
But do you know if how populated was the land before they got there? Was there?
It wasn't. It was unpopulated. So they had to clear it themselves.
Okay. So basically they
had
formed
to clear
a town,
it themselves.
formed townships of their own.
That's why when you ask about the churches, I said, I think they probably were more concerned about clearing the land enough to first build a crop, then get a house, and then get a church, or what now we call a community center, but a meeting place, to use the term they'd probably use it as, a meeting place. But it was uncleared land, but that's known through history. I mean, you can see that in the archives in Virginia. The request was that they be given land, but they had to clear it. They had to build it up to what it was or wasn't. And they had to work it because it was all uncleared land.
I think you mentioned also you said your grandfather had like white friends in the area. Did people white people move in later, or was it strongly a black community?
Moved in later.
Okay. Was it
because they probably gained possession of the land, and they moved in later. But yes, he had no problem having friends or colleagues, friends that were both white and black, because the farms weren't that far apart. And at that point in time, people still helped each other. I mean, they still helped each other.
I mean, we're coming here from Florida, and a lot of the oral histories that we've done are in the South or in the Mississippi Delta. And when you talk about black land ownership in the South, a lot of the time a common theme is that those
are sharecroppers.
Sharecroppers, I mean, it's a mix. Some people are very proud of in the South, very proud of their history that they did own the land, but oftentimes that land was taken or, removed from them in some way, sometimes violently. So I'm just wondering what you know about the history of that land that was owned in the Gist settlements. Was it only or was it, always sold willingly? Were there tensions about all of this land owned by black people in this area when more white people were showing up? Because I'm just curious, because it sounds very, you just said that people were getting along kind of, so it sounds very different.
They got along, but get along is one. I wish I had been there, but I wasn't there. I would assume that there were times when
the original owners or their descendants couldn't hold on to the land. So they may or may not have sold the land for something less than what we might call market price today. And that's how the original gift of the land changed hands. I think the other way it happened is as progress keeps happening, less people are relying on rural ways of life to live and sustain themselves. And so you have fewer people to work the land, fewer people to take care of the land because they're moving out into suburbia, into the cities, migrating north. So I think that's the other way. But that's why I think Granddad, the best description for Granddad would be he had relationships with a lot of people. There are a lot of people that still remember him. They see Peggy or I inserting, oh wow, yeah, those are Jim's granddaughters. That's Jim's granddaughter. They're up at their granddad's farm. Because that's where they're used to seeing us. But were they friends? No. Were they colleagues and respectful of each other? Yes. Does everybody define him as a hard worker? Yes. They can tell you the number of wells he drilled for them and that they still use those wells today. Because there are certain characteristics that just don't go away. But were they friend is I think a more expansive description or adjective than I would use. I think they were colleagues. They had respect for each other. But they also knew that this is their place. I hate to say it, but they lived here, I live here.
Going back to
your question about what I wanted from the Underground Railroad, or what did I, other than a place in history, or at least recognition, because it's not a place in history, it's recognition. I would hope at some point in time, the Underground Railroad Museum would be able to have some recognition of the freed Gist slaves, the whole incident of it, the happening of it, the occurrence of it, that that the Underground Railroad Museum would make the effort to place it there also, because it is such an important part, and because it is there. The museum is in Ohio, and the actual 3 original settlements are in Ohio.
Yeah. Clearly, there's so much to unfold from the Gist settlement, not on so many levels. We just need to keep talking to as many people and as many descendants as possible so we can and look at the records, discover as much as possible, because I see potential underground railroad connections from the descendants' travels, and once they live there, there's no way to untwine them. Let's see. Going forward, I'm trying to think of what to ask. Yeah.
The only other thing, because you asked me a question earlier about what did I expect to have happen other than recognition. I would think at some point, I would expect the Underground Railroad Museum to ask the remaining descendants that are left, and there's a lot of us all over the place. Is there anything that we would like to have placed in the museum in recognition of the Gist manumission of slaves? And I say that only because there are a lot of us, and out of the many of us that are out there, I for one would want them to ask that question, because aside from being a collector of Black collectibles, I also have a couple of items from my grandfather's farm.
that I would like to have made known to them, in addition to archival things. Like, I brought one of the things that I collect, and I'm not the only person, I'm certain, in America that collects this. But I said, I brought this thing with me. First I have to find it. There are about 19 of them in North Carolina.
Do you mind if
That's a slave tag. Yes, you can touch it. I keep it there. That's one. Those are the kind.
I've never seen that before.
That's probably true. Yeah. Porter was a common trade. Common trade for slaves, or a common. I call it trade's the wrong word. That's what they wore around their necks. Especially when Samuel Gist was doing favors with his friends, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, and trading slaves back and forth in terms of skill base. I'm certain that they had someone. That did not come from them. I bought that from a black man who was a collector in Chicago. He knew I was collecting, and so I met him at a collector's show. But it's those kinds of things that I don't see in the Underground Railroad Museum. And when I think of the Guest settlement, I'm certain there are artifacts that could be generated from the remaining descendants.
Yeah.
In recognition of the Guest settlement. If not in direct recognition of them, I'm certain that there are collectors like me that would contribute under their name, because I'm a sixth generation descendant, and yet I've collected Black collectibles for about 20 years now.
You know, one thing I think is important is most of the interview we've been asking about what these settlers did after they were freed, but it's also just as important to think about what happened before they were emancipated. And that's, do you want to go into questions about that? Do you have any family knowledge of what might have happened when they lived there before they were emancipated? Just so they have recognition.
We never heard those kinds of stories. But that just, like, as I said, my grandfather, James Peter Toller, the hardworking person, he was not you was not an out. You had to ask him the questions for him to give you answers. He's not going to be the type of person that tells you this and this and this and this and this happened. This is what I observed when I was a child. When I got beat for this. He didn't go into stories like that. He answered questions. Like I said, he referenced a couple of slaves in passing, but it wasn't like he talked a lot about what he knew, unless you ask him directly. And I wasn't. My uncles, my aunts, or my mother possibly, those people probably heard stories. But by the time he got to us, we knew him as Granddad. And going to his farm was important to us because we wanted to see him, we wanted to see the farm, and he always had a lot of animals. He always had a lot of animals. He was always growing tobacco. If he wasn't growing tobacco, he was growing corn. And that was important for us to see. And we knew that sometimes Dad would have to help out, sometimes Mom we'd have to help him out because the farm was big. But it wasn't like he told us a lot of stuff unless we asked him directly. Mm-hmm. I think that's one of, when I think of, my fascination with collecting Black collectibles was because I was traveling and I went to an antique show because I had to stay over for an extra day for a seminar. And I had to go to the mall, and the mall had an antique show. And that's when I saw the first one. And I remember going home and asking my mother, I said, Mom, I saw this Aunt Jemima cookie jar. I remember you had one of those. She said, no, it was a syrup holder. Because my dad ate pancakes in the morning, and my mother had Aunt Jemima stuff. And my grandmother had it. And that's what really started me in collecting. the connection between the two, well, it's just something. I got to see how people were not, the people that were collecting us, I was also looking at who's collecting us. And I didn't see a lot of us collecting us. I said, that's something that's not so bad.
What can you tell us about this book that you keep pointing to? Is this you and your sister wrote this?
No, it was written by Paul Young. When you talk about the guest settlement, aside from what's been written by Dr. Schwartz and Dr. Trotty, and they did their doctoral dissertations on it, and we met them when we went to Gold Hill. Paul Young, I didn't even know this book existed until Paul Young, and I told my sister this last night, I said, Peggy, Paul Young came to our house the day after my dad died. He came to our house to ask me if my dad had ever dressed in Indian attire to recognize his Native American heritage. I said, no, my dad did not. Because I took the position, and I was an adult. I said, oh, no, he didn't do that. He didn't talk about it that much at all. But I said it wasn't that he was ashamed of it. It just wasn't. It wasn't like at the forefront of his mind. And it was then he started talking. He then talked about and brought out this book. And I remember asking Mother. I was really surprised. I said to Mom after he left, I said, Mom, who is this guy and what's the deal? What's the deal, Mom? He said, he wrote this book about your grandfather, da-da-da-da-da. And he's just wanting to know a little bit more. And I said, well, Mom, Dad didn't trust him. He said, no, he didn't. You told him the truth. So don't even, that was that, and this is now move forward. But then the more you get into this stuff, especially after this illness thing popped up, then I said, let me get that book out and let me see what it looks like. I have another copy of it in green. This was just the one in paperback. That doesn't mean it's bad. It just means he was the first person to start writing about it.
Well, can you tell us more about that Native American heritage that your grandfather had?
On both sides. My granddad Wallace, who lived in the guest settlement and married in the guest settlement, was a full-blood American Indian. He fought and returned from the Civil War. On my dad's side, Peggy is researching him now on the Mills side. We know that there's more Cherokee on his side. Granddad Wallace, and I should know his tribe because Mother used to have a picture before the house fire of Granddad Wallace, because from his background. But he served in the Civil War and returned from the Civil War. And we're just now getting into that side of it because Peggy spent the most of her time, I just retired last year, most of her time on the guest side of it. Who knows? Well, maybe more. I wasn't surprised to hear about my dad. I mean, he talked a little bit about, but not a lot. But there were some indicators. They don't trust doctors, but neither did the slaves. They had their own homemade cures for things. And to this day, I still use some of them. I mean, Epsom salts is still a good, if you have a sore ankle or a sore foot, I hate to tell you, I should own stock in Epsom salts, the manufacturer, because I buy a lot of it, because it works. But it isn't like it was out there all the time. There are many times when people tell me, I'm not at all surprised when I am at the hairdresser, when I'm out in public, people say, how much Indian do you have in you? And I say, I have enough. And then I walk away. I said, I have enough. And then I walk away. But yes, especially if I have my hair down and not curled like it is now. But that doesn't surprise me, given what I know from both sides. But we have more work to do on the Native American side. But I made a statement early on that I was glad when I went to the Underground Railroad Museum that they recognized the nations, the 5 civilized tribes. I said, that's good, because they're a huge part of this. Because they were, I'm certain that as those slaves were looking for places to get north. And they had to get that far north I'm certain that they were in the nations. And I don't know that for a fact, but I lay good money down, and I probably wouldn't have bet, because I can't imagine them not stopping. And I can't imagine them not helping them.
Can you flip through his book a little bit?
Sure, you can look
It
through the
looks
book.
like there's more illustrations in it.
He has a lot of the listing of the names. Because I marked, just keep going through. He talks a little bit about it, because I marked some things.
I'd really love to see pictures from the settlement or illustrations, if there's many of those.
Well, when you go see Peggy in later this week, you'll get to see pictures of the settlement.
There's still some questions on here that we can ask, actually.
Okay,
You can still look at the book. It doesn't bother me. I brought it. That's why I brought it.
At the end. Because I honestly still want to know how you and your sister are passing all these stories down to your kids, if you guys have kids, or your relatives. Because, like, a big part of this is your mom introduced it to you and asked you to, like, figure out this.
I'm telling you, I said to Peggy, Peggy, what are you going to do with all your research? During the summers, because she's a school teacher, she's got it written down. Boom, 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 boom. And I said, what are you going to do? I said, I said, are you going to give it to the Ohio Historical Society? Are you going to give it to the National Underground Railroad Museum in Washington, D.C.? Because I said, I said, if I can't find a place to put some of my collection, I'm going to be looking there. I said, there's a museum out in Denver. I said, I've been there a couple times, visited it. And I said, I may leave it some of my collection, because I got a lot of stuff that I have to get rid of. But I said, you have a lot of this stuff written down verbatim about the Gist settlement. What are you going to do with that? What are you going to do with that information? Because that's valuable information that needs to be kept and retained. And I'm not certain what exactly her plans are, but I know that she's at the point where she's thinking about what she wants to do with it next. Because I told her, now that I'm not working anymore, I got to figure out what I'm going to do with my black collectibles collection. Because in addition to my slave tag, I got a set of slave chains. And I said, and I got a bunch of other stuff. I said, I'm going to decide if I'm going to give it all to one place, if I'm going to give it to a couple places. Because it's not something that people are going to just automatically say, yes, I want that. But if they had to see it in the proper setting, they'd understand right away what it was. Mm-hmm. Which is why when you ask that question about the recognition of the Gist settlement, there needs to be recognition of it, because there are artifacts out there somewhere about it that need to be called in and collected and put on display with the proper notification.
Definitely. We need a Gist settlement museum for
I don't know
all
if it's
of
a
these
museum,
descendants.
but it's something in terms of recognition, so that it's not lost.
Do you think any of your other relatives, maybe nieces, nephews, children, grandchildren, will be carrying on what you and Peggy have done in terms of collecting and researching, or?
I don't know. That's a great question. We would think that they would, but with all the other stresses and pulls of everyday life, it's like everything else. That kind of stuff takes a second place. I know when I lived in Detroit, when I worked for when I worked for my auto company, and I can give them credit. Volkswagen of America was good to me. I can't complain. That's when I had my stuff out there. Not out there, but I mean, people could come to my house, they'd see it on display and say, they would come and borrow stuff from me from time to time. They want to have a Juneteenth party. They say, hey, Marsha, we're going to have a Kwanzaa party. We want to have a Juneteenth party. Can we borrow a couple things from your collection? I want to have them on display. I said, yes. They said, you going to come to the party, by the way? Or are you going to come and bring it? I said, I'll bring it over to you so you don't break it. And then I'm taking it home when I leave. But yes, I loaned out a couple of my things. I didn't loan out my slave tag. I didn't. But I loaned out a couple other things to my very good friends. Or a couple times some of the school teachers
wanted to borrow something for Black History Month, because at my church, I said, okay, you can come and I'll loan it to you. Come on over? You can look and see, take what you want, just bring it back. And so in Ohio, I haven't done that because I was a different type of arrangement here in Ohio. But when I lived in Detroit, they had a different understanding. But we're also dealing with a population of 1 million Black people in downtown Detroit. So it's, the dynamics are a lot different. The community is a lot different. But it still doesn't mean I still have to figure out what I'm going to do with it, just like Peggy has to figure out what she's going to do with all of her research.
Something I've heard too is you just have to have the time. So it might be when they retire, it might be down the line. I think you guys have laid a significant foundation for them to continue building on, preserving the Gist settlement.
I am just hopeful that after I'm gone, they will hold the land. Because I saw this man work real hard. I saw my mother, when she had her half and took it over, what it took to pay the taxes and the maintenance and the upkeep on this land. And I would hope, if nothing else, that they would have, and it's at the point now where it's mainly they can raise crops on it to pay the taxes, so the ability to keep it would not be that difficult. But the stress of wanting to sell, I probably get no less than 1 letter every 2 weeks from somebody or some company that wants to buy my 13 acres. We'd like to talk to you about your 13 acres. Or this is how much we're going to pay you for your 13 acres. We went by it the other day. We'd like to buy it. And at least 1 letter every 2 weeks. And so if nothing else, I hope they hold on to it, because I know what it took for them to keep it this long.
Do you think something needs to be done so that people can keep this land within the descendants? What do you think should be done to keep this land in the descendants?
If they can prove that it should be theirs to get to keep, I mean that's the thing. I'm certain that there's enough documentation somewhere. But I know, and we make a lot of stuff, but we're not making any more land. And there's like a bounty and a premium on land, and so the right price, who knows? But that's why, even though they may not live there, they should be trying to do what they can to retain ownership of it. Whether or not that is because now it's been granted that they can keep it because it was a gift and it was supposed to be tax-free, but how that's going to go, we don't know yet. But I would hope that my nieces, my nephews, my cousins would have enough wherewithal, if they own part of it or if they're left part of it, to hold on to it.
Yeah, I definitely think there needs to be some way to have the burden of keeping that land not just put on the descendants, but also have them supported in some way.
The preservation of it, yeah.
Because it's more than just
a piece of land.
Yeah,
it's more than just a piece of land. It is.
Speaking of that, what is there any specific places that you can think of that are should be historical markers on the network to freedom within the Gist settlement? Do you think the church? Do you think, I
think, yes, I do. I have an opinion. You should go and mark the 3 settlements. And when I say the 3 settlements, you and I both know that there's land and churches on 2 of them. The 3rd one, it doesn't have a church. It has a cemetery. And there's land that the descendants still own, but again, it's more fragmented.
than both the Sardinia settlement and Highland County. But at the bare bones minimum, they should be trying to mark the cemeteries within the guest settlement and the churches.
You know,
Because it's evident. It's evident when you see the churches and you see where the land is for the churches that it was part of the settlement. And so even though there could be pushback and all that, it still needs to be made known and marked.
just so we have, because we have just because we have an opportunity to put it on the record, what do you think other descendants of the Gist settlement would want more than the bare bones? Like, do you remember a house where everyone would meet there? Do you think it would be?
No, but the other descendants would probably want the first black schoolhouse that is sitting on Gist land now, still held by the descendants. In fact, after the schools became integrated, descendants lived in the schoolhouse, but it still exists today.
You know, just for clarity, which settlement is the schoolhouse on?
Sardinia.
Sardinia. Do you? I definitely would love to.
I'm certain when you go see Peggy, I'm certain she's going to take you. It's not that far from the farm.
Yeah.
The reason it's so close, this is how close it is. I can remember as a child, Peggy can probably remember this story too. We were up at Granddad's farm. We were in the cornfield, and we were fooling around in the house, and Mother and Grandmother sent us out. And so we were out. He took us out. He took all three of us out into the cornfield. And at the time, I felt like we had walked 5,000 miles. I was tired. I was just a little kid. And he walked us toward the stream, a little Brush Creek tributary that ran through the Gist settlement. He walked us over there, and there was a lady there fishing. Mrs. Lydia Williams. And I can still remember Mrs. Lydia Williams. They called her Liza Williams. She yells down, she said, "Jim, are those Edna's kids?" Edna being my mother. And he yells back, "Yes, that's them." She was fishing out of the stream, and she lived in the schoolhouse. That's how close it is. You could look up and see. So I'm certain when she shows you the farm, that she'll show you where it's at. But it would be a place, yes, it should be.
You know,
because that's where they went to school.
in addition to, because I know you guys have been around Georgetown. Can you think of any sites in Georgetown other than the church? Of course, the church and the cemetery are also important there.
Well, and it's not going to be guest land, but when you think of the Underground Railroad, I'm surprised the Underground Railroad doesn't want to try. There are two very, very old black churches in they were in Georgetown, Ohio when I was a child, because I went to both of them. I belonged to one of them, Delaney Chapel AME, that I referenced. They have torn that church down now. The same for the Baptist church that's over by the Grant Schoolhouse. They tore that church down and turned it into a parking lot for the Grant Schoolhouse. But Delaney Chapel AME Church was built by Delaney, who he was a wealthy ex-slave and gave them the land for that church.
So we need to.
But again, as more people leave, they don't stay. They can't sustain the population to keep the church afloat. But I would think Delaney Chapel, and as well as what I call that was how it's referred to as the Black Baptist Church that's over by the Grant Schoolhouse. It's now a parking lot, because when I drove past it the other day, not the other day, but it's been a parking lot for at least 2 or 3 years, at least.
Do you think the people, the people in the building that the parking lot is connected to are aware of the history that site previously had?
Oh, sure they knew. Oh, yes. They were probably waiting to be able to buy it. They knew. You can't have church there for probably a good 100 years to 120, and everybody and his brother not know? I mean, if they know.
Do you think, how long ago was that torn down?
Delaney Chapel, I think, was torn down last. I don't know the exact date, but I would say it was torn down. It's been less than 10 years.
Less than 10 years, pretty recent.
Less than 10 years.
Do you think the people...
They knew what they were doing.
How can...
Commerce, we're making a lot of stuff, but we don't make more land, and we need the land.
Yeah.
We need the land.
Let's see. Do you think, wrapping up, what do you think should be done to repatriate a lot of that land on the Gist settlement? Do you think there's what would you want and your descendants?
If I had a magic wand and could say, just give us back the land. But I know that that's not possible because there's so much stuff that's already been built up on a lot of the land. The few people that still have the land, then do as much as you can, whatever that may be, in modern day terms, to honor the wishes of Samuel Gist, the original benefactor. Give them back their land free and let them have it.
Yeah.
But I know the caveat's still got to be where it's still owned by descendants, because most of it is not owned by descendants anymore. Not because of malice, but progress marches on.
Well, wrapping up, before we start looking at the book, because I definitely want us to look at the book if we can, but is there anything else that you want to add on to the record before we close?
No, there isn't.
No, that's good. I'm glad we got everything. Is there any special pages on the book that you want to show us? Is there anything we definitely want to? You have a better eye for it than we do.
Only because hey, you would kill me. I can't remember this guy. I'm sitting here. I am Sally. What is Sally and Jim? This man was so nice to me. But now, this is where I give Paul Young credit for a couple things. I mean, and not that I don't give him credit for a lot, but the man came at me the wrong way the day after. I said, I'm not up for this, Mom. What is this man doing here? But hey, it wasn't like I hadn't already been told through many times. You have a lot of Indian characteristics, and I'm certain I do. He did a good job here talking about these Gist's slaves.
Yeah, strawberry. That's what immediately.
I told you. Every once in a while, it isn't like it was. He was a very, very soft-spoken, mild-mannered, tall man. Here it is. Okay, another incident for James Peter Toller. I can still remember this happening. Here he is. Granddad was 88 years old, and they made him take his driver's test over again.
Per year?
Yes. He comes down to my mom and dad's house, and I can still remember my mom and dad. These are the exact words. Granddad had to come down. He drove down in his truck to borrow my mother's car to take his driver's test. It's a true story, to take his driver's test. My mom and dad were sitting outside. Really, we had chicken at lunch. My dad says to him, now, Jim, if something happens, he said, Jim, if something happens when you take your driver's test, if you don't pass it, don't worry. We'll still come up and help you. We'll help you do shopping and everything since you won't be able to drive. Granddad, in true granddad fashion, looks him straight in the face and says, I will still be driving my truck. My mother throws up her hands and says, but Dad, you won't have a license. I will still be driving my truck. I walked out of the room and said nothing. I said, okay, go ahead, Granddad. He goes in her car. He passes his test at 88. He's still driving his truck in true Granddad fashion. And he drove home to Sardinia, Ohio in his truck.
Wait, can I?
Here's my dad said, now, Jim, we're going to come. We'll help you. You won't be able to. You won't be able to get your groceries done. I will still be driving my truck. I said, hey.
Wait, also, so did all of this information in this book come from your granddad?
No, I think Paul Young went and researched this book himself. He's got two. Peggy has I have a green copy. I just couldn't find it. But I'm not even certain why Paul Young did it. Peggy still has communication with his sons. But when she did the markers with the 3 settlements, she went back to the valid records and got the names of the original ones, and so we know we have the right ones. Our great grandmother Betty, who had obviously some type of association with Toller, and we don't know if it was Toller, the slave master, or his son, because at the time that all this occurred, his son was old enough to reproduce and have children. And we don't know the relationship he may have had with Betty.
Yeah.
We just know that when he got here, she took the name Toller. Mm. That's his name.
Mm. That's amazing. Thank you for showing it to us. And
no, I mean that's the kind of, I'm just telling you, that is a true story about his drivers. I'm telling you, if my mother were here today, if my dad were here today, they'd have to tell you it's true. I can still, because my dad didn't always, he said, now Jim, he didn't always talk, he talked to Granddad. They knew each other quite well, but it isn't like that he said, now Jim, if something happens and you don't pass, don't worry. We're going to help you out. We'll be up all the time. We'll help you across the, Granddad just sitting there saying, hey, I'll still be driving my truck.
My granddad was the exact same way.
My mom threw up her hands. Dad, you can't do that. You won't have a license. And he said, I'll still be driving my truck. He drove his truck home after he passed his test. I said, okay, there's so much Granddad.
Marsha, can we get a picture of you holding?
It's a good thing I brought that one. Is some of the other stuff. If this guy from Chicago knew I was doing all this with his slave tag, he would have a stroke. No, he wouldn't have a stroke though, because he was a collector. His collection was much bigger than mine.
Mm-hmm. Do you know the history at all about that?
I have it at home. I just moved into a new condo, and I had to go hunt down this stuff. I don't, because I still have to get the carpeting down that I have to put my 2 big showcase. I had 2 what do you call them? Yeah, they are. They're like five shelf showcases.
like library case type thing.
But I said I have to get this stuff. I moved it in my little bags so it wouldn't get busted. Because usually whenever I move, I have to move it myself. Because especially my slave chains, I generally have to drive them if I'm going to move anywhere close. But yes, it's from the South, and I've had this now. When did I get this? It was when I was in Chicago. I took it to the Ohio Historical Society when they were having the Antique Roadshow there, but because I wasn't going to sell it, I told them I just wanted them to authenticate it again, and they did. Yes, they knew right away what it was when they saw it. They knew right away, But I said, no, I'm not selling. I just wanted to make sure you guys authenticate, because I said, I know that I need, one of the things I'm going to do for this slave tag, I'm going to send it to a collector, not to an archivist. I want him to put it in a box. I've seen a couple of them on display, a couple places, not very many places though, but more than just this that I got it in, because this is exactly how I bought it. I remember it took me 3 paychecks to pay him for it because of the cost. But that's because I'm not walking around. Even when I bought this, probably 13 years ago, it was an expensive item then, and it still is, because the majority of these items are in North Carolina on display in one of their African American museums. Because when I want to research this one, I usually go to the internet and say, North Carolina, and they have a museum where they have the largest display of slave tags. But that's when I bought mine, I was still holding mine. But that's why Peggy, when you see her, she'll take you to the schoolhouse. She may remember standing in the cornfield, but sometimes she remembers that. I remember that kind of stuff. Why? Because I was tired and I thought we had walked 5 miles. And when I look at where Granddad's house is, where we were in the cornfield and where that lady was at fishing, it's like maybe 600 feet. But I thought we had walked forever. But you know, that's because we're in the middle of a cornfield. She may remember that, she may not. But she'll definitely remember and be able to tell you what she's been doing with the gatherings, because she organized them and started them out that way, and how she got them to the point where they had to have the markers on the cemeteries. It's still very fragmented, because there are some people that want to talk about it and some people that don't. There are some people that think that if they talk about it, you're only doing this because you want to come and take their land or do something. And it's not. It was never about that for me, because land was never a big issue. I mean, land was important to me, but I didn't have the sense of what it really was until I was older. When we grew up, going to Granddad's farm is something we did because one, Mother went there every week. We always went there on the weekends. Granddad would come into town sometimes and come to our house. Sometimes he'd want Dad to do stuff with him. Sometimes we'd want him to do stuff with us. But it wasn't like we sat around and talked about this thing like it was. Only my mother, her recurring thing. You girls, better figure out this gist thing. You girls better figure out this gist thing. But she couldn't articulate what it meant. When they did his article for this, and I'm pretty certain it was in the Cincinnati Post and Times-Star, when the Post and Times-Star was still being printed. Because see, now they don't print that newspaper. They only print the Inquirer. But I think that article, if my memory serves me, it was in the Post and Times-Star. Because I'm kicking myself. When I had to move in Michigan, my landlord I had a storage unit, she threw away the stuff in my storage unit by accident. And I said, what did you do? And in that storage unit was that article that I was going to try to get framed so that I would have it. Because at the time he had already passed away. But I said, can't worry about it now, move forward. So I said, okay. But I said, there's still some things that I have from his farm. And Peggy has a couple items too. But I know I'm not unique. There are descendants that are my age or younger that haven't been gone from the settlement that long. Do they call it the settlement? No. But the people that are coming up here in July, their last name is Cumberland. The Cumberland's acreage was not that far away from my granddad's farm. It was not that far. I mean, we're talking, you could walk to it. That's how close it is. And so they want to meet these descendants of theirs that are Cumberlands, and they want to see the land on the settlement. Do the Cumberlands still own it? That's the question. I think they own some of it. Do they still farm it? No, probably not. Because most of them, they grew up, they moved out. Some of that, they know, do they go back home? And I don't know if they go back home to visit because the parents, when I was growing up, their parents, like my parents, have both passed away. But the Cumberlands had a ton of kids and a fairly large number of acres. And that's why this guy is coming. He wants to see his descendants and the land. Did they go to Breast Creek Baptist Church? You bet they did.
because there's no way they could have avoided it. No way they could have avoided it because you could walk to it from their house. Well, what I think of walking today, people don't walk that far. But if you only had to walk maybe less than a quarter of a mile to get to church, because you can see the church from the back door, you'd walk to church.
Yeah, that's why they were so long-lived too, because they walked.
You know, you'd walk to church.
Yeah.
Especially if there was a social activity going on, and you saw your friends walking to church also, you'd walk to church for the community, if nothing else, for the community and the socialization issues.
I'd walk twice that far for transparent pie. Like,
Transparency pie.
easily.
I'm telling you, the last place I'm telling you, ask Peggy. Marsha said you had transparency pie at the Golden. Yes, at the Golden Lamb. We both said it at the same time when we saw it. I said, "Oh God, transparency pie! This is a dessert." I was sitting here waiting to see something really big. Not that it was bad, but it was just like, yes, I know what that is. My mother's made it many times.
There's no chance that I'm not going there and not having transparency.
They had it.
pie.
I'm telling you,
gonna
go on
happen.
Thanksgiving because that's when we went there, and they had it there as part of the dessert for the menu.